good night, and may God bless.
I resent just as much as the people.
Popularly known as America's Clown, Red Skelton made the entire country laugh through the Red Skelton Show. Week after week, he became a familiar face in American living rooms. A man whose job was simple on the surface: make people forget their worries for a while. And he did that better than almost anyone. But behind the laughter, the story wasn't nearly as joyful. For a man who spent his life making the world smile, his own life carried a sadness few people ever saw. While audiences laughed, something far more complicated was unfolding behind the scenes. And when America said goodbye to its favorite clown at the age of 84, much of that story went with him. Until now. At 78, Red Skelton's daughter is finally stepping forward to confirm the truth about her father. A truth that reshapes how his life, his comedy, and even his silence should be understood. So what did she reveal? And why did it take decades for the full picture to finally come out? Join us as we get into all the details. Before the laughter, the tragic early life of Red Skelton. Red Skelton was one of the most successful stage, radio, and television entertainers America ever produced. To the public, he was clean comedy, gentle slapstick, and goofy characters that felt safe enough to invite into your living room. Families trusted him. Audiences adored him. Laughter followed him everywhere. But under the clown makeup was a life shaped by hunger, loss, and disappointment, long before fame ever found him. The joy people saw was real, but it was hard-earned, and the cost of it followed him for the rest of his life. Red Skelton was born Richard Bernard Ehart on July 18, 1913, in Vincennes, Indiana. The name itself carried confusion. Ehart belonged to his father's stepfather, a surname his father sometimes used. Even the year of his birth became disputed later in life, partly because Skelton began working so young that he claimed to be older just to get hired. Survival had a way of bending facts early on. He was the youngest of 4 boys, born into a family already stretched thin. His brothers came before him. His father never truly got the chance to know him. Joseph Skelton, a grocer who had once worked as a clown with the Hagenbeck-Wallace Circus, died 2 months before Richard was born. A collapsing circus tent had crushed his body, ending both his career and his life in one brutal moment. That loss didn't just take a father. It erased stability overnight. The family store disappeared. Their home followed. Neighbors in Vincennes remembered the Skeltons as painfully poor. One childhood friend later recalled that her parents forbade a teenage romance between their daughter and Richard because they believed he had no future, that he would always be poor, always struggling. Even then, people could see the weight he was born into. By the time he was 7, Skelton was already working. He sold newspapers. He took odd jobs. Anything that brought in a few coins went straight back to his mother, Ida, who worked multiple jobs just to keep food on the table. On street corners, Richard learned how to talk fast, joke faster, and keep going until someone bought a paper just to make him stop. Without realizing it, he was learning timing, rhythm, how laughter could be coaxed out of desperation. Then something happened that stayed with him forever. Around 1923, while selling newspapers outside a theater in Vincennes, a stranger approached him and asked what was playing in town. Richard pitched the show like a seasoned promoter. The man bought every paper he had, giving the boy enough money to buy a ticket for himself. Only later did Richard realize the stranger was one of the show's stars, supposedly comedian Ed Wynn. The performer took him backstage, introduced him to the cast, and pulled back the curtain on a world Richard hadn't known he was allowed to dream about. That moment planted something permanent. Comedy stopped being a trick for survival and became a path forward. School didn't last much longer. By 13 or 14, Skelton dropped out entirely. He had already performed in local minstrel shows and found steady work on a showboat called the Cotton Blossom, drifting along the Ohio and Missouri rivers. He loved the work, the applause, the motion of it all. He stayed until he realized showboat entertainment was fading, and he needed to move before it vanished completely. He tried serious acting next, joining the John Lawrence Stock Theater Company. It didn't go well. Every time he attempted drama, the audience laughed. In Uncle Tom's Cabin, a malfunctioning treadmill sent him moving backward across the stage. Panicked, he yelled that he was backing into heaven. The crowd roared. Management didn't. He was fired within a week. Comedy wasn't something he chose. It was something that kept choosing him. By 15, he was working the burlesque circuit. By 16, he had reportedly spent months traveling with the same circus his father had once worked for. Life kept folding in on itself that way. Ida Skelton didn't push her youngest son out the door, but she didn't stop him either. She understood something important. His destiny had arrived early, and during the Great Depression, one less mouth to feed may have meant survival for everyone else. Around 1929, Skelton joined Doc R.E. Lewis's traveling medicine show. He started as an errand boy, selling bottles to skeptical crowds. One night, he fell off the stage, smashing bottles everywhere. People laughed hard. Both Skelton and Lewis noticed. The fall became part of the act. Skelton began telling jokes, singing, and leaning into the thing that always worked. He earned $10 a week and sent every dollar home. When his mother worried about him having nothing left for himself, he brushed it off. They ate well enough. They slept in the wagon. That was enough. Long before America ever laughed with him, Red Skelton had already learned why laughter mattered, and he never forgot where it came from. The partnership that changed Red Skelton's life. Skelton eventually walked away from vaudeville when it drifted into territory that didn't sit right with him. The jokes were louder, sharper, and more suggestive than he was comfortable delivering. For a while, he made a living emceeing dance contests, a job that kept him on stage but exposed him to a tougher, less forgiving crowd. It was there that his life shifted in an unexpected way. After one show, a young woman named Edna Stillwell approached him and told him, flatly, that she didn't care for his jokes. Skelton, never rattled and rarely defensive, asked her if she thought she could do better. It turned out she could. Less than a year later, they were married. Almost immediately, Edna began writing his jokes. But she wasn't just a punchline machine. She became his anchor, his strategist, and the steady mind behind the physical chaos audiences adored. If Skelton was the pantomime man, Edna was the architect quietly holding the whole structure together. She didn't stop at comedy. Because Skelton had left school so young, Edna took it upon herself to fill in the gaps. She taught him trigonometry, medieval history, the things he'd missed while surviving. When a boss later tried to cut Skelton's salary, Edna marched in herself. Skelton resented the interference at first, until she walked out not only with a raise, but also with additional benefits. He learned quickly that her calm exterior hid a spine of steel. They were barely adults. Skelton was 1 month shy of 18. Edna was 16. Still, they built an act together and began booking small Midwestern theaters. When an offer came from Harwichport, Massachusetts, it felt like progress. Not because the job was glamorous, but because it edged them closer to New York City. To get there, they bought a used car and borrowed $5 from Edna's mother. By the time they reached St. Louis, they had 50 cents left. That night, Skelton asked Edna to collect empty cigarette packs. She thought he was joking, but did it anyway. He spent their last coins on bars of soap, cut them into small cubes, wrapped them in cigarette foil, and sold them as fog remover for eyeglasses. The trick worked. One sale at a time, they earned enough for a hotel room each night as they crept eastward. They worked for a year in Camden, New Jersey, before landing an engagement at Montreal's Lido Club in 1934. The start was rocky, but the act found its rhythm. More dates followed across Canada, and with those performances came something new: attention. While in Montreal, they met vaudeville producer Harry Anger, who promised them a headlining booking at New York City's Loew's State Theater. There was one condition: they needed new material. Sitting in a diner one morning, watching customers dunk donuts into coffee, Edna had an idea. Together, they created the Donut Dunkers routine, a wordless sequence of visual impressions that let Skelton do what he did best. The skit won them the Loew's engagement. It also changed everything. By 1937, they believed this was Skelton's moment. Worried his humor wasn't polished enough for New York, they hired comedy writers to refine the act. The audience didn't laugh. It wasn't until Skelton abandoned the new material and returned to Donut Dunkers that the theater finally came alive. The lesson was clear. His strength had never been clever words. It was honesty, timing, and physical truth. That same year, while performing in Washington, D.C., Skelton was invited by Franklin D. Roosevelt to entertain at a White House luncheon. During a toast, Skelton grabbed the president's glass and joked that he'd been rolled in a place like that once. Roosevelt loved it. From then on, Skelton became a fixture at the president's birthday celebrations, trusted to bring levity without malice. Hollywood took notice, though not immediately. A 1932 screen test went nowhere. But in 1938, Skelton made his film debut at RKO. Short subjects followed. Then MGM came calling. On screen tests, Skelton mixed rehearsed routines with spontaneous pantomime and impressions of movie heroes dying dramatic deaths. It worked. Throughout the 1940s, he appeared in a steady stream of MGM films, often cast as comic relief, sometimes as the lead. He worked with major stars, popular directors, and audiences who were beginning to recognize something different about him. Behind the scenes, Buster Keaton took him under his wing, coaching him during productions and later advocating for a joint production unit that would have paired them creatively. The studio declined. Still, the influence lingered. As Red Skelton's fame grew, so did his frustration. His contract with Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer controlled everything. His radio shows, his public appearances, even charity events required approval. Films paid well, but radio paid better. More importantly, radio gave him freedom. It let him reach people directly, without interference. Television, still experimental at the time, intrigued him even more. He knew instinctively that his physical comedy would work there. MGM didn't see it that way. By the late 1940s, Skelton was done pretending movies were his future. He wanted radio. He wanted television. He wanted control. He couldn't afford to buy out his contract, and the studio refused to release him. Negotiations dragged on, tense and exhausting. Eventually, MGM relented just enough. They granted him limited television rights, making him the only major MGM personality allowed to step into the new medium, but only on their terms. By the early 1950s, Skelton was juggling radio, television, and film, even though he promised himself he would never do all three at once again. He was still technically barred from appearing on television until the final stretch of his MGM contract expired. A renegotiation finally cleared the way. On May 4, 1951, Skelton signed a television contract with NBC, with Procter & Gamble as his sponsor. He made it clear he wasn't reinventing himself. He planned to bring the same characters audiences already loved from radio onto the screen. Even then, MGM held him back. The agreement forbade him from going on the air before September 30th, 1951. When that day finally arrived, the Red Skelton Show premiered on NBC. The debut was pure Skelton. At the end of his opening monologue, two men backstage grabbed his ankles and dragged him face-first off stage behind the curtain. No grand speech, no build-up, just physical comedy, instinctive and fearless. His theme music, David Rose's Holiday for Strings, became inseparable from his presence on television. The move to TV gave him room to expand. He created the non-human seagulls Gertrude and Heathcliff, miming their flight by tucking his thumbs under his arms and shaping his hat into a beak. His meek, henpecked George Appleby evolved naturally from his radio character J. Newton Numbskull. And in 1952, he introduced Freddie the Freeloader, a clown modeled after his father's old makeup, recreated from stories his mother had once told him. Every episode ended the same way: a shy, boyish wave, a soft goodbye, and the words audiences came to expect: good night, and may God bless. And even as Red Skelton became a permanent fixture in American homes, the foundation of his life never really changed. It wasn't built on ease or luck. It was built on improvisation, on sacrifice, and on partnerships forged when he had almost nothing at all. Red Skelton's complicated marriages. Red Skelton was married 3 times, and none of those marriages were simple footnotes in his life. Each one marked a turning point, not just personally, but professionally too. His first marriage was to Edna Stillwell in 1931. They had met when she won a dance marathon Skelton was emceeing, a moment that would quietly shape the rest of his career. Throughout the 1930s, Edna wasn't just his wife. She was his collaborator, his editor, his shield. Together, they built the routines that made his name. What the audience saw as effortless comedy was, in reality, a carefully constructed partnership. By 1942, that partnership was cracking. Edna told Skelton she was leaving him, but said she would continue managing his career and writing his material. He didn't believe her. Not really. It wasn't until she issued a formal statement about their impending divorce through NBC that the reality sank in. The separation became official in 1943. Even then, they left the courtroom arm in arm, offering no explanations, no public bitterness, and no clues about what had finally broken them. Professionally, Edna prepared to move on. She considered writing for other radio programs and relocated to New York. But even after the divorce papers were signed, she left Skelton with 3 fully prepared show scripts. Almost immediately, the calls and telegrams began. Skelton and those around him asked her to return, at least in a professional capacity. She did. Edna continued managing the couple's finances because Skelton spent money as fast as he earned it. When he tried handling his own checking account, it started with $5,000 and was overdrawn within 5 days. The phone call to Edna followed, sheepish and urgent. From then on, Skelton lived on a weekly allowance, while Edna invested his earnings in real estate and safer ventures. She remained his financial advisor until 1952 and received a generous weekly salary for life. The marriage was over, but the reliance never fully disappeared. The divorce carried another consequence. Skelton lost his married man's deferment and was reclassified for military service. In early 1944, he was drafted into the Army. Neither MGM nor his radio sponsor could stop it. His final Raleigh radio show aired on June 6, 1944. The next day, he was formally inducted as a private. Without its star, the program ended. The space he left behind opened the door for another family to step in, launching The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet. While navigating military life, Skelton's personal world stayed unsettled. By 1944, he was engaged to actress Muriel Morris, also known as Muriel Chase. They secured a marriage license and told the press the wedding was imminent. Then, suddenly, it wasn't. Muriel called it off, first claiming she planned to marry a wealthy businessman in Mexico City. She later withdrew that story, but maintained the relationship was over. Rumors swirled that Edna's continued involvement had caused the split. Both women denied it. Edna made it clear she had no intention of interfering or reconciling. The uncertainty didn't last long. While on Army furlough for throat problems, Skelton married actress Georgia Maureen Davis in Beverly Hills on March 9, 1945. They had met on the MGM lot. He traveled from his Eastern Army base for the ceremony, aware he could be sent overseas at any moment, and wanting the marriage settled before that happened. Shortly after the wedding, he entered the hospital to have his tonsils removed. With Georgia, Skelton became a father. Their daughter Valentina was born on May 5, 1947. A son, Richard, followed on May 20, 1948. On the surface, his life now looked complete. A successful career, a new marriage, children, stability. But patterns don't disappear just because things look settled. For Red Skelton, love had always arrived under pressure, shaped by timing, obligation, and survival. Even in moments that felt safe, there was a sense that something could still slip. And while his public life continued to expand, his private world remained fragile, balanced more on momentum than certainty. For a brief stretch, it worked. The family was together. The laughter still came easily. Then, at the height of Red Skelton's popularity, when his face was everywhere and laughter followed him wherever he went, his 9-year-old son Richard was diagnosed with leukemia. Red Skelton's greatest tragedy. At the height of Skelton's popularity, when his face was everywhere and laughter followed him wherever he went, his 9-year-old son Richard was diagnosed with leukemia. Doctors gave the boy a year to live. The network told Skelton to take as much time as he needed. No pressure, no deadlines. But Skelton believed something else entirely. He felt that if he stepped away from the stage and the cameras, he would lose the one thing keeping him steady. He believed he couldn't make his son's life joyful if he himself fell apart. So he went back. On January 15, 1957, Skelton returned to his television show. His longtime friend Mickey Rooney appeared as a guest, helping carry the weight of that first night. In happier times, Skelton had spoken about his children freely on air, folding them into his routines the way fathers do when life feels safe. After Richard became ill, he couldn't bring himself to mention them at all. It hurt too much. He only resumed when Richard asked him to. After the diagnosis, Skelton packed up his family and left the country. He wanted his son to see as much of the world as possible while there was still time. They traveled across Europe, turning the trip into something that looked like adventure, but felt like borrowed time. On July 22, 1957, the family had an audience with Pope Pius XII. Richard later said it was the high point of the journey. The trip ended sooner than planned. In London, an aggressive reporter crossed a line. British newspapers followed with relentless cold coverage. The Skeltons quietly returned home. Back in the United States, support poured in. CBS stood behind Skelton. The public did too. But the strain was already showing. In November, Skelton fell down a flight of stairs and badly injured his ankle. On December 30th, 1957, he suffered a severe cardiac asthma attack. He was rushed to St. John's Hospital in Santa Monica. Doctors later said that if there were 10 steps to death, Skelton had already taken 9 by the time he arrived. He didn't know how close he'd come. He remembered working on notes for television, then waking up in a hospital bed. He only understood the seriousness of it after reading about it in the newspapers. The illness kept him off the air for a full month. He returned to his show on January 28, 1958. Then, on May 10, 1958, Richard died, 10 days before his 10th birthday. Skelton later remembered asking his son whether he wanted a birthday party. Richard said no, just a few friends. Skelton brought a Sears Roebuck catalog to the hospital and told his son to pick anything he wanted. Richard chose a tent, camping equipment, and a red blanket. By then, the veins in his arms had collapsed from transfusions. An IV ran through his leg. As he lay there, slipping away, he asked his father if he would give the red blanket to his mother for Mother's Day. He added that he didn't suppose they would let him leave the hospital with the cut on his leg anyway. About an hour later, Richard said he couldn't see. Everything was fuzzy. And then he was gone. Skelton was scheduled to appear on his weekly television show the day his son was buried. The network had older programs they could have rerun. Skelton asked them not to. Instead, guest performers stepped in. Friends from television, film, and music organized the Friends of Red Skelton variety show to fill the hour. By May 27, 1958, Skelton was back on the air. Richard's death never loosened its grip on the family. Years later, Life magazine described Skelton as still racked by the loss. In 1962, the family moved to Palm Springs. Skelton kept the Bel Air house, but only used it 2 days a week when he came into Los Angeles to tape his show. The laughter continued, but it came from a man who had buried a child. At 78, Red Skelton's daughter just confirmed the truth about her father. Red Skelton died at 84, but the truth about who he really was didn't end with him. It lingered. In the silences he left behind, in the art, in the things he never said out loud. And years later, through the way his daughter chose to protect his memory, that truth became clearer than any public confession he ever made. Skelton passed away from pneumonia on September 17, 1997, in Rancho Mirage, California. Around the same stretch of life, he also endured one of the most quietly painful contradictions of his story: the question of how he coped when the lights went off. Some sources insisted he never touched alcohol. Others suggested that, after losing his son and watching his marriages strain, he leaned heavily into drinking to survive the pace and pressure. What seems most likely is this: if Skelton buried anything, it wasn't in a bottle. It was in his work, in his art, in staying busy enough not to think. By the time his television career ended, he had already given decades of his life to the audience. Even so, despite still pulling in strong ratings, CBS canceled The Red Skelton Show. Publicly, Skelton accepted it with grace. Privately, the wound stayed open. He believed the decision was a betrayal. Another door slammed shut without warning, and it wasn't the first time the ground had dropped out from under him. Years earlier, Skelton had survived a health crisis that nearly ended everything. He fell down a flight of stairs, injured his ankle, and then suffered a severe cardiac asthma attack. Paramedics rushed him to St. John's Hospital in Santa Monica. Doctors later said that if there were 10 steps to death, Skelton had already taken 9 by the time he arrived. Fate tested him again in the air. In July 1951, Skelton boarded a flight from Rome to London for a 4-week engagement at the Palladium. Mid-flight, 2 of the plane's 4 engines failed. The remaining 2 were under severe strain. The aircraft drifted toward Mont Blanc. A priest on board prepared to administer last rites and told Skelton to do the same. Skelton replied that the priest should take care of his department, and he would take care of his. While the plane fought for altitude, Skelton entertained terrified passengers with pantomime. Somehow, the aircraft made an emergency landing in Lyon, France. Even when death leaned in close, Skelton reached for laughter first. That instinct followed him everywhere, even to funerals. At the service for the notoriously feared studio chief Harry Cohn, Skelton delivered a line so sharp it cut through the grief and had mourners laughing through tears. He remarked that Cohn had been right all along. Give the public what they want, and they'll always show up. But when the audience left, Skelton didn't. After performances, once the theater emptied, he would return to the stage alone. In the silence, he repeated a line that sounded less like philosophy and more like confession. He reminded himself that an hour earlier he had been important. Someone. And now it was gone. Tomorrow he would have to start again. Comedy paid the bills. Art held the pain. Skelton was a prolific artist, painting constantly, almost obsessively. His dealer once claimed Skelton made more money selling artwork than he ever did entertaining. He wrote songs, short stories, allegedly more than 8,000 musical pieces over his lifetime. But one subject followed him everywhere: clowns. He once admitted he knew exactly why he painted them. He just didn't feel like thinking about it. In the end, he shared the only lesson that truly mattered. He said his mother had taught him not to take life too seriously, because no one makes it out alive anyway. It sounded like a joke. It wasn't. After his death, his daughter Valentina Skelton became the quiet guardian of that truth. She didn't give explosive interviews. She didn't rewrite his story. She honored it. She helped preserve his legacy, attended the opening of the Red Skelton Museum in his hometown of Vincennes, Indiana, and ensured that future generations understood that her father was more than a funny man. He was an artist who survived by creating. Valentina remained close to him until his death in 1997. The little girl who once appeared on his show grew into the woman who protected his place in history. When she passed away in April 2022 in Rancho Mirage after a terminal illness, the museum later honored them both with a special exhibit, remembering Red and Valentina. Photos, artwork, proof that their bond outlived them. At 78, she didn't confirm her father's truth with words. She confirmed it with how she lived, and with what she chose to preserve. Were you a fan of Red Skelton? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Also click the next video shown on your screen. You will enjoy it.